Welcome to this episode of Clinically Press. This is the first episode from our trip to Nebraska and Kansas that we took earlier this summer. In this episode, we are at Omaha Sport Spine in Omaha, Nebraska, and are talking with Corey Campbell, owner and operator, along with several other chiropractors. Corey is a big educator and on the board of the Motion Palpation Institute, has done all kinds of different things within the chiropractic realm, and is always looking to expand his practice with different ideas. He also shares with us lots of philosophies about patient care, how to run a clinic, and just generally being effective and leading a full career and life as well. We really enjoyed this discussion, and we hope you do as well. Please check out all of the episode as well as the show notes for links to everything that Corey mentions in this episode. Enjoy.
Welcome to this next episode of Clinically Pressed. We're here in Omaha with Corey Campbell, and I'm going to talk a little shop today. Corey, a little side note, when I was in chiropractic school, I took my first seminar ever, outside seminar with Corey, and he lit the fire. It was an awesome seminar, and has been kind of a mentor to me, and so he does an awesome job, and we're heading down here to Kansas City, and it worked out well to stop in Omaha, so we're here, happy to be here, and happy it worked out. So
Covered about a quarter of the state of Iowa, which
Yeah.
is good on the way over.
One way to describe it.
There you go.
HP are out in full force.
Oh man, yeah, there was a lot of cops out today.
Yeah.
Apparently I-80 is a hotbed.
It is.
So a little background, Corey's very functional based. Motion palpation is kind of my introduction to him, but do a lot of DNS and a lot of just functional stuff. So I don't know, do you want to just give a little bit of a background?
Yeah,
about
as
you
far
and
as
what you do?
just as far as my background from chiropractic school, it was largely motion palpation based then. We didn't have much of the DNS. We didn't have any DNS at the time. We didn't really have FMS or SFMA. So I was introduced to motion palpation in Tri-2 because I was told not to go to a class because it ruined me for the rest of my career. So I signed up right away, took
There
a
you
class,
go.
Nice.
and Dr. Elder was the instructor. And it was the first time that chiropractic actually made sense because I came from a farm and ranch background originally, and then I was a medical technologist after getting out of school, undergrad. So I came from a very black and white, yes or no, it's either you have cancer, you don't have cancer, you have this disease, or you don't have this disease, to this philosophy-based, dogmatic type of, environment that we'd go from a philosophy class right into a spinal anatomy class, and nothing made any sense, nothing jived. And so I was really struggling with chiropractic school early on. Somebody had mentioned the motion palpation coming to Kansas City. Again, I asked my instructor, my static palpation instructor, if I should take it. He told me no, so I signed up. And it's the first time that there was actually some scientific rationale behind the profession. And there was a reference list, and there was references in the presentation, and it just kind of lit a fire in me that still obviously burns today because I teach for the Motion Palpation Institute, and I'm a member of the board now. And so that's kind of my background. It was all motion palpation at the time. There was a little bit of ART, there was a little bit of Grassley towards the end of my career in school. And so those were the only classes we really had. And then after graduating, I started the rehab diplomate right away because through school I read a lot of McGill's work and Levinson's books and anything I could get my hands on that was somewhat functionally based that made my practice style, kind of develop it. So I did the rehab diplomate right away after starting up a partner practice in Lincoln through the university, through National University in Chicago. And through that I was able to go to Prague, and that's kind of how the evolution of the practice style started. So it was very heavily rehab based early on. It's kind of starting to come full circle to where it's an integration of the things that we need to do based on what we find in our assessments, and that's kind of how we plug all these other things in that's out there now.
So is there still kind of a dichotomy a little bit within the field of people who are a little bit maybe more traditional in their approach?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's probably 2 or 3 different camps in the chiropractic profession, as Kyle can probably tell you, but there's one group that, is almost all functionally based, and they don't really mix in like the skill part of it, like the palpation and the adjusting part, like the very essence of what makes chiropractors. And then there's people that are just on that end of it where it's all palpation and mostly just adjusting and philosophy. So we try to fill this middle ground with, not just like a technician that's doing DNS and rehab and ART and Graston and just kind of like doing the technical stuff that they know, but like blending it together and using those tools where they're needed versus just being really good at a tool and just using it. Mm-hmm. And then, we hope to be that middle ground that kind of, we always say that we're teaching to the 15%. We hope to get to 15% of the profession. We know that our audience is small because what we do doesn't have protocols necessarily. We don't have a bunch of algorithms that you can follow. It's not cookie cutter. So we're kind of in that middle ground. We're not philosophically based. We're also not just, almost ashamed to be chiropractors and just doing rehab and soft tissue work. Like we're proud to be chiropractors, but we just need to learn how to integrate these other things or take the best of these other things and learn how to plug them into a patient base in a way that's beneficial for the patient and easy for the doc and kind of eliminates stress for both parties.
It's well said. It's a good way to describe it.
I think that almost crosses over to a lot of different styles of training. Anytime a new training technique or a protocol or even an instrument comes about, it's like, does it work? Is it just a current fad? And then how do we write programs and how to use it and not get too sucked into, okay, this is the end-all be-all.
Yeah, that's my favorite one with all of our athletic training students. As soon as something new gets introduced, or like we have somebody come in to talk about something, then that's all it is for the next 2 weeks.
Right.
Like when they learned about Graston, we wore those tools out for 2 weeks, and then it kind of started coming back a little bit.
Right.
I know I had the same thing when I went to my first ART seminar.
Exactly.
Clearing off my injury report. Well, that didn't happen.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And now it's just figuring out when's the best, and
yeah,
it's almost like how you said it. It almost makes too much sense, and that's why people can't get on board with it.
Right, and
everything you can get.
Yeah, everything has really valuable information, like SFMA and FMS. Like that's really good stuff. Especially from an assessment standpoint, DNS, any 3 letters that you can put together. MPI is one of them, so we're just as guilty as anybody. But it all has good information. It's just, we want the easy, the quick, the protocols. What do I do here? What do I do here? And honestly, we just try to grab the best of these other things, and we plug them in based off of our assessment. We use some of it as an assessment, and then based on that assessment, we say, well, I think this person would do really good with Graston, and a combination of manipulation and maybe some low-level rehab, or maybe this person needs all stability and no myofascial work. Like you have to let your assessment guide your treatment, not just what you're introduced to and what the new hot fad is.
It's a little bit harder, I think. Rather not having that cookie cutter, it's a harder approach maybe to try to figure out, but it's nice to take the best of all these things and combine it.
Well, we just wrote about the art versus science and all this stuff, and for every thing you read that says this is the way to do it, there's 2 or 3 things that say maybe not so much, and trying to pick and choose what's best for you.
Yeah, and I was that way. Like when I started my career, like a lot of what I teach is based off of screw-ups that I did early in practice. I was the same guy that I thought I was going to fix everybody in 4 to 6 visits. And that just doesn't happen. Like especially if you're truly a functional person, like you can't change function in 2 weeks. Like it's impossible to do.
How many duty cycles that set them up for that?
Yeah, I mean you're basically trying to create an environment that's going to allow for a more optimal adaptation to what you're trying to do, so that their function increases. And you can't do that in 4 visits or 6 visits. So I made that mistake. I was very evidence based, like to the point to where like I knew so much stuff that I would like literally shut patients off by talking too much to them and not realizing that patient care is based on making some sort of a connection on a right brain level, not a left brain level. You can make them feel a difference. You can make them even see a difference or feel different. Then you kind of have then you kind of have some repertoire with that patient. You have some trust built in, and you know, there is the hardcore evidence-based people that only do what's out there. You know, the evidence-based practice, best practices, whatever. But there's a middle ground. There's things that I do and changes that I make that I can't explain necessarily. I could probably rationalize it to some extent. And so, you know, 13 years of practice has definitely humbled me and made me realize that, honestly, like, if you just let patients know that you care and they don't know how good you are, like, that's the biggest compliment you can actually have, is that you've got a way to integrate all these other cool things in a way that's the best thing for the patient, and they don't really even know how much you know or how good or how many hours you put in to be that way. Like, that's my goal, is to have people like me and appreciate and respect what I do clinically, but not know like all the ins and outs of all the hours and stuff that I've done. So that's like the biggest compliment I think you can get as a clinician.
That's pretty cool. Or not know that all that you know for the, I think you said 13 seminars you've taught since the beginning of the year, basically.
January, right. It's, you know, but my patients think it's cool that I teach, and, you know, they definitely, but I don't go in depth, you know, with my patients the way I do with my students and docs that I teach to. But they do think it's cool that, you know, I'm constantly out there trying to learn stuff, and there's times when, you know, I don't have all the answers, and I'm okay with that now. I wasn't okay with that 10 years ago, you know, so.
Yep.
I think sometimes not knowing too kind of drives me anyways to know more and to, you know, to try to figure it out and be like, okay, well,
Just having a bigger toolbox.
Exactly.
A different point of view.
Yeah, and I think we get, you know, when I was taking classes through MPI, you know, there was a bit of ego, and I think there's ego in all the classes, you know, to some extent. Like, their way is kind of the best way, and, you know, like, I'm done. We've kind of just gotten rid of all that criticizing and that ego stuff in the MPI world, because we know that there's a lot of good stuff in FMS and DNS, and I mean, we got an instructor that teaches for DNS, and Dr. Winchester, so we incorporate all the good things that we get in those classes, and we don't badmouth anybody anymore, because really it's about, you know, it's about building your practice the way you want it and having a practice model that you're comfortable with and you can master, but realizing that it's going to constantly evolve, because you should, you know, I'm a firm believer in not just playing to your strengths, but if you want to, if you want a practice that looks this way, there's things that you don't know that you're going to have to go out and learn, and you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone, and you're going to have to just admit that there's a better way of doing it than how you were doing it. And like, I think that's what makes this such a cool model. It's so fluid and it's constantly challenging. We're just kind of in the phases of, we're going to implement some FMS and more of the SFMA like assessment part, because that's something that we just don't do a great job of, and it's something that we think has value. And so anything that we think is valuable from an assessment or treatment standpoint, like, we're going to find a way to use it, and that's why it's nice to have Dr. Peters here and Dr. Eismanger. We got, you know, different views and different strengths and weaknesses, but, you know, and it helps me because there's things that I can get better at, or there's new things that I can learn, and that's, like, I think that's cool, like, versus just playing to your strengths and being steadfast and planting your flag in the ground saying this is the only way to do it.
So anyways, plus the information, there's always new research coming out, and we're finding more and more out, and I think that's kind of cool too.
When I first started teaching what's called the LDMA and upper dynamic movement assessment classes now, our rehab classes in MPI, we were teaching transverse abdominis contractions, you know, like isolating those things and swelling multifidus, like you're just completely wasting our time.
Right.
I'm halfway through the list of students that I've called back and apologized to for teaching them something that probably was just a huge time suck, you know, and didn't really do much. But that's what we knew at the time, and now we know differently. You know, we know that it's not isolated muscle contractions; it's movements, and it's global activation, and getting the whole shoulder girdle, the whole hip girdle, or the respiratory diaphragm, and all those muscles that push against that intra-abdominal pressure. Like, now we know more than we did, and so we've changed all of that, and we're cool with changing that.
Yeah.
I was more than happy to not teach that stuff anymore.
I'm sure you taught them a lot of good though too along the way.
I hope so. I don't know. I hope it outweighed the
I hate that feeling too. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I used to tell people some of this stuff.
Right.
Geez, in the nutrition world where it just seems to change daily on what's the next thing or what's the next big supplement that's going to fix everybody.
Right.
that goes back and forth too. That was me, I think.
No, I was gonna say, who are you chatting with?
Siri, what are you doing here? Get out of
Chip it
here.
in there.
I think that's a good transition to like the global aspect that you talk about, and DNS we've mentioned a little bit. So how do you incorporate that into what you do here? Obviously, you've got a lot of people that want to see you, and I'm sure you could spend probably an hour plus with each individual patient. But how do you kind of condense that down, I guess?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question there, is how do you take all this really cool information? Like when I went to the rehab diploma, it was 300 hours, it was 2.5 years worth, and every class had great information, but if you were to just do what they told you to do in a class, you'd be spending 45 minutes with the patient. And financially, like that just doesn't work. Like you just can't do it. I suppose you can do it, but you'd have to be so high priced that you have a very select group of people, and it would take a long time to build. So the way we do it here, I have 15-minute follow-ups, 45-minute exams. So I have longer exams because I want to really figure out what's going to work for the person. So we use DNS as part of our assessment, and obviously a large part of what we do from an exercise base, especially like entry-level rehab, respiration retraining, isometric core stabilization, isometric shoulder and hip girdles, those kinds of things based on DNS principles, because that seems to be the best way to get things started. And then you can go to more of the functional, like the Gary Gray triplanar lunging and those kinds of things, 6 or 7 or 8 weeks down the road when they're ready for it. But you have to kind of build the foundation first. So we use DNS as an assessment tool, and then a lot of the entry-level exercise. And sometimes like we don't even get outside of that entry-level stuff because they're working with trainers, and we're just keeping the foundation solid, and they're doing all the other work, which is kind of what we do.
So do you do that rehab with them in-house, or do you refer out to
in-house.
certain?
Yeah, in-house.
Is that you doing it, or do you have
right now
trainers with you?
it's just us right now, but ultimately like that's the model we're moving to. So again, that's part of the constantly trying to grow and change. Ultimately, we'd like to have a trainer in here that would do that. Like that's how we would want to do it. We would train him in the DNS principles, the DNS exercise classes, those kinds of things, and then he would do, because it seems like the DNS exercise is kind of the best way to get things going, and patients respond to it well. It's easy for them to understand. It's a lot of cueing, so it's a lot of feeling versus mechanistic movements that don't really we don't move that way typically.
Right.
And so ultimately, like that's what we would like to have. Something that Dr. Winchester has been, I've been here for 4 years. Prior to this, I was in a large multidisciplinary orthopedic spine surgery group, and so I had physical therapists there that could also do that. But now we're kind of in that building process. So over the next 2 years or so, we'd like to ultimately have like that here in-house, and then offer even like DNS exercise class things here and those kinds of things, and athletic injury prevention programs and things like that. Like that's where we're kind of migrating towards.
Taking notes over here? Yeah, like I say, your wheels should be.
That's
that's
it
a
sounds
good
ideal.
idea.
It is. No, that's
As
nice.
far as a treatment standpoint, though, for what I do with DNS, like we were trained classically when it's called reflex locomotion before it was even called DNS, because I was in Prague in 2004 with Pavel Kolaj and all the whole group, the Yonda camps,
Nice.
the Brugger camps.
I wondered if that's where
Yeah.
you were going with the global thing.
Yeah.
To go into Prague.
Pun
Yeah.
intended.
Different type of global.
I
Yeah,
didn't
that's.
even
I was
think
like,
of that.
oh, maybe
Yeah.
he was going that way.
So I know the DNS now is more exercise based, and it's great. Like I love the exercise, and I love the way they have it laid out. It was very scattered when I took it, so it was more reflex activation when I took it. So I use that as a tool to kind of get things more normal from a function standpoint. So if you can't turn off erectors, or if you just can't turn this muscle off, or if they can't turn on the glute medius, like I'll use the reflex stuff. I'll use a couple minutes of that to get the reaction I want, get the muscles to fire, get the patient to feel it, which is important that they make that neurological connection, so that when they do an exercise, they can reproduce that feeling, which is important. That's one of Kolaj's big points that he used to make, is if you're doing a reflex activation of the diaphragm and you start to see it, but they can't feel it, like you've only done like half of your job. So you've got to have them make some sort of connection. And so that's how I use it. I'll use a couple minutes, 2-3 minutes of DNS to turn on muscles or to turn off muscles, and then incorporate the myofascial work or the post-isometric work or whatever, and then obviously the palp and adjust part. You just, at the end of your assessment, your 45-minute assessment, you should be able to go back and highlight those major findings and know what joints need to be worked on, know what muscles need to be worked on, know what needs to be turned on, and the best ways to kind of attack that. And you don't always know the best ways. That's why you need to give yourself 3 to 4 weeks to figure that out. But that's how I use it, and so I'm very efficient. So in 15 minutes, I can get a lot of work done. Nice. And then they kind of progress, and we change the treatment plan as it goes along.
So with that treatment plan, is that selecting exercises that try to overcome some of those weaknesses, or do you have to do more isolated stuff before they can even do those exercises or movement patterns?
Yes. Yes. Right. So I just had a patient here that comes. She's been coming to see me for a while. She's got some new complaints, classic thoracic outlet stuff. She's always had some scapular instability. We had to restart with her. So today we did some scaling releases, worked on the cervical thoracic extension problems that she's had. And then we went back to square one with some DNS scap rehab, I just finished up with her. And it was all based just on quick exams. And so everybody's a little bit different. But yeah, you gotta find, what is their major issue? Is it, if they got so much muscle tension, it's not gonna do you any good to try to turn that muscle tension off through exercise. You're better off doing something that's gonna affect the muscle tension and give that 2 to 3 weeks to work before you even plug in any exercise. So you kind of have to let the person's, your assessment guide what happens, and then you almost have to assess by treatment, what's working for this person, what's not working for this person. Give yourself 2 weeks and say, hey, are we making a difference, or can you feel a difference? Have you changed trigger points? Have you changed their graphesthesia awareness? If you draw letters and numbers on their back when they're face down, they can't tell you what they are. That's usually indications of long-standing dysfunction or chronic restrictions. Those things should change, things that they can't necessarily cheat on, So you got to have in treatment audits and then 2-week audits that kind of guide you whether you're doing the right things or not. So that's how I kind of tell. I audit constantly. Am I changing this trigger point pattern? Am I changing, am I changing the joint motion? Am I changing the muscle tonicity? Am I changing the neurological responses? Hyperreflexia is not normal. If you're treating people the right way, you should normalize reflexes. You should normalize graphesthesia sense. Those things should change if you're doing the right things. And that's really quick, easy ways to make some clinical audits that they're either there or they're not. Either you're doing the wrong thing or you're not doing the right. You're doing the right thing. So there's no cheating it. And I like that. I like to hold myself accountable.
Because we kind of talked about that, almost a recurring theme with athletes who have mobility restrictions or kind of lingering issues, but you still need to keep them in prime condition to compete and get that training effect. It's how do you get the best of both worlds and address some of those issues, but at the same time still get them bigger, stronger, faster to compete. Right.
Yeah, and with your high-level athletes, I don't see a ton of high-level athletes here. I see a lot of higher-level runners, if anything. But yeah, with your athletes, that's a tough balance. And so, our standpoint here is that we have functional audits and things like that, if they can do these things functionally pain-free, then the performance stuff, they can run with that. That's kind of our take on that. And we can help them with, kind of preparing for movement. Dr. Winchester works with the Cardinals, and so I've learned a lot from him as far as what he has his throwers go through prior to their warm-ups even. So he basically primes the neurological pumps and the stabilization pumps through various exercises, which is a really cool way to incorporate, with your athletes. They love it. It's like a warm-up, and so those are some things that we've started to use.
That's pretty cool.
We started to switch to that, and we're gonna try and roll it out more this year, implementing more FMS, but then going through and building that right into their workout program.
Right.
So we started following this Exos style performance.
Right. Yeah.
So building some of this stuff into their pillar prep and their movement prep, it's no longer a warm up.
Right.
And then into their kind of complementary exercises as they're working through their actual primary and secondary movements.
Yeah, and that's a perfect.
And then they don't have to come in and see us later to do all that stuff. We don't stretch at the end of a workout. You've already done all of it in your workout. You're done.
Right.
I think they look at it differently.
Get your recovery and then go home.
If they see warm up, then they think, well, sometimes maybe they don't want to do it. But if it's actually built into the program, I think it's a lot.
Yeah.
They just view it differently.
Oh,
almost.
absolutely. And you got to play with that too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's where people, I think, in the general fitness industry just fall so short, is they ignore all that other stuff, where if they would just integrate it into their actual hour workout time that you have.
Well, you keep the person moving too.
Right.
There's no sitting still. Like our athletes never stop moving unless they gotta wait to get on to their next exercise because the guy before them still finishing it.
Yeah,
That's the only time they wait.
Yeah, the fitness industry is no different than any other industry, like our chiropractic industry. You've got a handful of groups like you guys that definitely want to master your craft, and then you got a handful of people that are in it to do boot camps and make money and, and to crush people. So it's no different than it's no different, And
We just
sometimes
had that
that's
conversation.
Third time on this
So,
drive down here.
It's that way in the medical profession. It's that way in the physical therapy profession. It doesn't change much. So.
Yeah.
Hopefully heading in the right direction.
Right.
No matter what. Anyway.
I just think we have more information out there available. The assimilation part is where we're still figuring it out. I think is kind of the thing is that I think we're with the exo things. I think we're on the right track. I think that it's just going to continue to improve, and then just a matter of are people going to take time to really learn it and understand the nuts and bolts of what you're doing and how and why you're doing it, and that's I think that's where DNS, FMS, MPI, like these other groups, I think they just need to kind of
play nice
yeah.
together.
Like you were saying, just the egos within professions, but then the egos within the interprofessional relationship.
Oh, for sure.
And nobody wants to check their ego at the door.
No.
And that's where I've found especially with the Exos one is it's all in that building. I mean, everybody knows kind of their role, but there's overlap, and they're all smart people, and they all understand that, and
right. As long as
they're going to
on the
work
same
together.
Page,
they're all
OPEX
bought
is
in.
the one that does a good job in your profession, I think.
Because you never want to be. You always want somebody smarter than you in some area.
Absolutely.
Around you.
Yeah.
Nutrition, a lot of all the functional things that you do, that the breathing and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really know exactly what I bring to the table with that, but I don't have my niche necessarily. But
humor.
There you go.
Yeah.
Trying to anyway.
Yeah, that's right. No, you're right though.
Oh yeah, I think. Yeah.
Be well rounded. Everybody. You got a little bit of knowledge of everything, but you got to have somebody that's their thing.
Right.
And just be good with that.
Yeah.
Put your
I have
super team
mentors
in.
now. I use Mark King as my business and kind of just my life coach. That's kind of, David Seaman's my go-to for nutrition. From a technical standpoint. I'm lucky enough to be able to speak with some really high-level PTs and some other instructors, and so yeah, you do. You just have to have people that push you, and once you think you have it mastered, then you're kind of on the downhill slope, going in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
So that's
Learn that lesson too many times.
Right.
So when you do all this, the seminars and everything, what's your favorite thing to just go and teach?
Oh,
Talk about.
gosh, that's kind of that's a loaded question there.
It is.
I would say if I had to rank my favorite classes as far as teaching, I love teaching our MPI spine class, the palp and adjust, the entry level. This is how a joint works. This is how you assess it, and this is how you treat it. I love that part of it. It's still my favorite part of my treatment is being able to palpate and adjust.
One of the best adjusters ever, right here. Actually,
So,
yeah.
And and that's the thing that I don't. The old docs give too much credence to the power of the adjustment, and the new crop, I think they don't quite appreciate the power of it.
Brush it under the rug a little bit.
I think part of it is because they think it's more just a technical thing that you do, and don't really give the credence to the craft part of it. It's not the adjustment that is the hard part. It's the big find out where you need to apply the adjustment and what direction, what planes of motion you need to be able to affect the joint and change those kinds of things, and then the palpation part of it. So I think that's probably my favorite class to teach. My second favorite is the upper, because I love the intricacies of the shoulder and respiration and the first rib and those kinds of things. I really like that class too. So it's kind of a 1 and 1A
That's cool.
part of it. But we've come full circle, and I've definitely come full circle in my career to a point to where I don't think the new group of students coming out that's so functionally based gives enough credence to how difficult palpation and adjusting, the adjusting part, yes, it's difficult, but the palpation part, I don't think they realize the diagnostic capabilities that we have right here in our hands. And, being able to palpate muscles and joints can cut down a lot of times on your treatments, but it really creates that connection with your patient, really makes them know that you're in the right spot. When you can grab a trigger point and recreate some issues in their hand, or you can make them feel a restriction. It's got a lot of power just in like the relationship between you and your patient, like that makes that patient very comfortable with you, makes them realize that they're in the right spot, and you've got immediate buy-in. So if you can't palpate and adjust in our profession, in my opinion, and you're not an absolutely try to master that craft every single day in some way, then it's harder to get the buy-in from the patient to do some of these other things. Like if you're just holding points and getting muscles to react, like patients, that's a hard buy-in.
They're
to
looking
just
for
do
more
a
than
bunch
that.
of exercise and do a bunch of DNS work versus, give it 2 weeks where you just do the palp and adjust and some muscle work, and then you start to integrate these things. I think they would have much better success building a practice that's sustainable, that has patients. You're going to be lifelong patients, which I don't think is a bad thing in our profession. You don't have to see you every single week for the rest of their life, but when they need somebody to get them back to where they're, where they want to be, then you should be the guy they go to versus their medical doctor. So I don't think having lifelong patients I think that should be our goal. And I think one of the ways to do that is being an absolute master at what you do.
So do you see, or would you say that if someone is just a fantastic at their palpation skills, that if they're a really good palpator, that the adjustment kind of just follows along with that?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you can palpate, if you can feel it, the adjustment just kind of follows along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's, the two big things you have to be a great adjuster is palpation skills and speed. And so those two things you can work on. Like you can, that's the hard part. Yeah, I mean, that's the motor development.
That's an interesting one.
Right. It's what McGill talks about with his MMA guys. It's pulsing. It's it's being stable and being relaxed and being able to contract and relax. And then those are like the same concepts that you see across most ballistic sports. It's the same thing. But yeah, if you're a good palpator, you know where the joint's restricted, you know what axes of rotation is restricted, and so you just put the patient in the most comfortable position to affect that axis, and everything kind of falls into place, and then you can do, circus tricks, and then maze your fellow colleagues and things like that with pinky adjustments and elbow adjustments. But it's all based on the palpation. If you can palpate, you can pretty much plug in whatever you want and just be fast. So those are the two things you have to be, to be a great adjuster, is your palpation skills. And it's something that I still work on. Like I'm still tweaking things, constantly, because being able to assess the joints a lot harder than I think we even get from, some of the schools. Like it's not an easy thing to do, and it's different for everybody. You're built differently than I am, and I'm going to move different than you are, and so it takes a while to kind of figure out what, how to assess those joints the best way.
Sure.
And then you get people like Andy in there that
Yeah.
difficult.
Big patients or
Right.
You talked about like lifelong patients, which I think is awesome. No, and we've talked about this a little bit, and it got brought up on another podcast that I was listening to of like insurance potentially rolling over and almost going to a preventative aspect. Do you do anything with that, or have patients like that? That it's not necessarily they've got anything wrong or something's killing them, but they still come in just to make sure everything's
I do.
going well.
I have a few patients that are that way. In
see
this
that as a
practice, you don't see it as
way
much.
or chiropractic might end up going, because I know that's something that you've talked about, trying to go more functional medicine where it could almost be that way.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it as well, just with doing
I think it's
testing and biometrics and different things
Right.
just throughout the year.
I think it's kind of morphing into that anyway, because people don't want to go. Like people would rather come to somebody that offers like a spectrum conservative care thing. So it's not like they're coming in every 6 weeks just because.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a few patients like that, but they're usually older patients that just kind of like that's what helps them manage their issues. Like I'm not going to change a retroverted hip, but
Right.
every 6 weeks or so they come in and I do the best I can to get some hip mobility, things like that restored. But I think it's kind of morphing into that. Like the people are more apt to go conservative care route because we're less expensive than if you go to your medical doctor and get the the protocol of an anti-inflammatory muscle relaxer, and then if that doesn't work, like some sort of opioid medication, and
Summed it up right there.
Plus it's cheaper because, now with managed care, like medical doctors or even family practice, they're increasing like their assessment rates because that's the only way they can kind of stay afloat. I mean, chiropractors are used to not getting paid much, so we figured it out a few years ago, so we're kind of ahead of the curve there. So I think it's morphing into that just by the nature of the business, honestly.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's going to be a huge market in like 10 years.
Right.
Just with all the insurance stuff that's already happening.
Right. You're seeing it already with like concierge medical care, those kinds
Mhm.
of things.
Yeah.
You're starting to see that. Yeah.
I know one of my favorite. We were just talking about this one too. Is even like looking at like doing labs. Like if you change your oil more often than you check your own blood work.
Oh, and most people do.
Right.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
I
for sure.
don't know the last
Yeah.
time I've never had like a full
Right.
blood thing.
Right.
I don't even know. Like, and the only one I know is going to cost me $600.
Right.
The oil change is only 40.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Right.
Yep.
But I mean, it's just, I think everything's kind of changed that way, with the information we have about nutrition, the information we have about even just things like meditation and relaxation techniques and, the conservative care route. Like, I think I think we're more mindful of a group of people anyway. I think we have more information. We're more mindful of doing things more naturally now. So I think we're in a really good position, honestly. Like, I'm optimistic about the profession, just in general because of that, and some other reasons. But I mean, I think we're in a good position for it. We really are.
Not only just doing things more naturally, but more treating the problem and not just managing symptoms.
Right.
Like,
Right. Not just hosing it down with an anti-inflammatory
Right.
injection
I like
or
that.
something,
Hosing it down.
Right. Yeah. Or
Exactly.
some sort of pharmaceuticals. Yeah,
I think
we're
more
not.
people are starting to realize the benefits of doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And some patients come in and they've gone that route for a period of time and it's not working for them, and maybe they're looking for another answer and be like, oh, maybe this isn't the way we should go about it.
Right. Right.
Which is good, as long as they
Yeah,
come
and I
around.
think there's a pocket of chiropractors and trainers and people like that we really need to kind of shout from the mountaintops that, like these people can help you in a variety of different ways you don't even know about. Like, and so, we kind of have to
The
let people
education
know.
is such a hard thing.
It is. It's
to
hard.
get people to buy into, like, you can move better.
Right.
Or maybe you should just
And how that affects them,
stand
too.
a little bit more instead of sitting in your desk for 8 hours a day.
Or
And
eat
just
better.
how,
You know that. I mean,
simply eating better and changing things.
food, lifestyle habits and food choices, like there's an emotional attachment to food that's very hard to break through.
We've just even tried to beat into people's head just the change, like, don't believe the scale. Like, you got to figure out how to do body comp. You have to, because the scales might not tell you what is actually happening.
Look how long it's changed to change the mindset of the old food pyramid. Like, what David Seaman calls the death pyramid.
Yeah.
Like, it's backwards of what it should be, And
We
now
still
they
use the
kind
BMI.
of changed some things, in that, but it's taken a good decade or longer to even just people still think the food pyramid is what we should be doing. And
Right.
so it just takes time, and it's like Mark says, like if you're going to implement a system into your office, like you got to repeat it over and over and over again. You got to have weekly meetings and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and that's
So it makes it a system.
That's kind of where we're at. You just have to constantly beat people over the heads with it. So.
Have you seen that South Park
I was
clip
just gonna ask that.
with
Yes.
the inverted
Pyramid,
U?
it's upside down.
Oh, okay. I think we shared that one time because it was hilarious.
I talk about it in my nutrition class all the time.
That's great.
Well, I saw the FDA just changed their nutrition facts panel for the first time ever, I think.
And that's it.
I know you had mentioned about on our
Politics.
supplement episode about creatine. I think something about it was saying vitamin D is now going to be on it.
Yeah, vitamin D it shows like your percentage of daily intake, and then it now is bigger and bolder, the calorie amounts in there, and some of the other things have changed. But I mean, first time ever that those have been addressed, and I think they were developed in like the 50s.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're drowning in information, and if somebody just needs to throw the rest of the public a lifeline on how to implement it and how to integrate it, and getting it changed at the federal level is tough because there's a lot of money in politics.
Money and hoops that you got to jump through.
Right.
That is tough.
And unfortunately, that drives other decisions, like school lunch programs are based off of some of those policies that are developed at the top level. And
So that's what people are learning from
through
that
it,
too.
yeah, and you develop
Vicious
those eating
cycle.
patterns at that age, and no wonder we have an obesity epidemic on our hands.
Right. Yeah.
Sad.
Well, you guys have any other questions, or should we get into?
We can get into
The
the
big
clinically
three?
pressed ones.
Probably should.
It's actually 4, so we got to stop saying 3.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Gotta change it.
Can't
Yeah.
count. Well, what's
do you remember any of them?
I know one.
Okay.
offhand. I can never remember. Yeah, whatever. It's baseball. I mean, that's not that bad of an
Right.
average.
Mendoza line. You're good.
So, what's an influential purchase for $100 or less? Could be health, fitness, whatever related.
Yeah, so I saw the question. Also, I'll do two parts. Like under $100 in the rehab world, your best bang for your buck are the resistance loops, the pre-made loops. Like we use those loops all the time. Those little yellow bands.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That are
Little
over the
mini
shirt.
ones.
Yeah,
Mini bands for sure.
Bands.
Well under 100 too.
Well under 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get a pack of 10 for $10 or whatever it is. So like the biggest bang for your buck in the rehab world is that. OPTP has box sales of foam rollers. You can get under $100. You can get 6 of them for $50. Like that's another really big
The
purchase.
foam roller shows up again.
Yeah,
right.
it's been a pretty common one.
And then exercise balls. So I would say like those 3 things, there really isn't much you can't modify and make work.
For sure.
From a fitness standpoint, I would say like the heavy loops, the heavy resistance bands, like those are very. There's a couple of them hanging up there.
Yeah.
They're different
Monster
levels.
bands.
Looks like
Monster
every
bands.
rubber band.
Yeah. The home TRX units are really good. I'm
Utilize
kind of
those
a
a lot.
body weight kind of guy. Like I think you can get a lot done with
For sure.
that. And the exercise ball again, you can do a lot with that too. So that's all well within the underneath $100.
We were just talking about the Tim Ferriss podcast that he just had with the gymnastics
bodies.
Yeah, talking about
Former
a lot of
Olympic
body weight
coach.
stuff.
Yeah. So I don't think there isn't too much you can't get done with those 3 things.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what is something that you might believe that others may not?
Gosh.
It can be within this world or your other world. AJ's is
Yeah.
always believing in aliens, so.
Hey, it's okay. I was an X-Files guy.
There you go.
There you go. Coming back.
That's right. They are excited about that too. Yeah, I read that question. That's an interesting question. I don't know if it's so much that it's something I believe that other people don't believe. But as far as like clinically, I believe that presence has power. Like if you're truly present with a patient in that 15 minutes and you're really like focused on how you can help them, what kind of vibes you're picking up, are they negative that day, are they positive that day? Like I think presence has a huge power. And so kind of our mantra here from as far as clinicians go is, the 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever the patients are here, like it's their time. Like we're not worried about texting or what emails or what classes I got to get onto it.
With
like
my students.
Yeah, like I got a lot on my plate with 4 kids and family and teaching classes and running a practice but when I'm in the clinic in that treatment room and the door's closed or even if the door's open, like I try to make that the best 15 minutes of their day. And so I really believe that like presence has power and I have days that I don't necessarily always follow up with that and I don't beat myself up about that. But that's one of the things I'm kind of passionate about. Like I think the hard thing for students is that they have to go from an environment where it's all about them into an environment where it should be all about the patient. And that's a really hard switch to trip. And it just took me a while to kind of figure that out, that it's not about me. It's about me being really good at what I do and then transferring that to the patient to kind of best help them. And so I really believe the only way you can do that is to truly be present, with that patient, just kind of try to pick up on what they're going through, in that day. I
like that.
Yeah, so that's one of the things. The other thing I believe in, we kind of already touched on, is like I don't think most docs don't realize the potential they have right there in their hands as far as like a diagnostic capability and as from a treatment healing standpoint. Like I think most docs are scratching like 10 or 15, 20% of their potential as far as like diagnostic capabilities with your hands and like healing capabilities. Like you can do a lot with your hands that I think we truly don't give enough credence to. I think that young docs and kind of the newer docs that are coming out, like I truly believe that they don't give themselves enough credit to figure things out, and that if they remain persistent with whatever it is they want to do in practice and how they want their model, I think people quit too early these days. Like I really believe that there's a lot to having grit and persistence, and it's not about being the smartest guy or the strongest guy or the smartest gal or having the best location. I think it's truly about knowing exactly what you want and having the persistence to doing it. Yeah, and just realize that if there's no struggle, there's no progress. Like those are the 2 recurring themes in all of life. You can't have one without the other, and you just kind of have to relish the struggle. I think people quit too early.
That's good. What's the success if you didn't struggle too? You're not gonna really savor it as much either.
No, easy never made great.
Yeah.
Never. So you gotta. Anybody that works
so many
out.
one-liners out of that. Just that last bit that I can't wait to use again.
Like a bumper sticker highlight.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I just sit around and write stuff.
There you go.
Instead of paying attention to my patient, like I
Yeah.
just, yeah, that's good.
all lip
I gotta
service.
write
I gotta write that down real quick.
I gotta put that in my notes on my phone. Give me a second.
Yep. One of the professors we work with, every once in a while, like he'll shout out, and I was like, "Where'd you come with that?" He goes, "I don't know. I just said it. Did you write it down? Because I don't remember."
Right.
Going on the presence thing too, The Power of Now, I think that's one of my favorite books
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
I really like that. I think it is important.
I have it on audiobook and I revisit it about once every other month. So.
Do you really? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, that and Wayne Dyer's Manifest Your Destiny and
Yes.
The Charge by Brendan Burchard, like those are 3 absolute must-haves.
The Charge, I haven't read that one.
You have to.
I like Manifest Your
We should
Destiny
throw
too.
book recommendations
There you
in at
go.
the end. We really should.
Yeah,
Just
you're
'cause
right,
we're
we
all
should.
relatively average.
Yeah,
readers.
I think anything Wayne Dyer does.
5 questions now.
Right,
Getting
exactly.
busy.
There you go.
Created something new now.
That's right.
Tim Ferriss said, "These are rapid fire, but they don't have to be rapid answers."
Yeah.
That's right.
So then the other one of the other two, any take-home tips or like an ask that you would have for people that would watch this, like if you give them something
Right. So as far as
to
like
apply to their life.
Eat their Wheaties.
right, from a
Really?
clinical standpoint, from a clinical standpoint, like 3 tips I would give new docs coming out is to, especially if they're going to, whether they're starting their practice or whether they're going to associateship, like they need to write down what it is that they ultimately, like their goals. They need to write those down. Like literally take a pen out, those old things, those antique things we call pens,
Love 'em.
and paper, and
Don't
actually
have one.
write it out. And then the other thing I would say, one of the biggest tips I ever got is to schedule your days and your weeks, not your years, and literally write things into your schedule that you're going to stop whatever it is that you're doing and you're going to do that thing, whether it's becoming a better adjuster, a better palpator, whether it's getting out and doing some marketing events, whether it's learning how to do a YouTube presentation, like literally write it into your calendar and your agenda. The studies show that all the successful people, they're all persistent for one thing, but they're all very, very disciplined in scheduling like their changes and their progress. And so they literally, I'm going to read this book this week, and they write it into their schedule, and they do that. Like they, so I think scheduling your days and your weeks versus your months and your years, like I think that's one of the things that really helped me, kind of just stay to task. Cause
Actually
it's easy
get stuff done instead of have the ambition.
The other thing is not to dwell on the numbers.
We need to do that a little bit.
Need
Right.
more of that.
We're gonna do this summer.
We all do. I mean, I say that, and I fall short too. So I always have to kind of go back and
For sure.
revisit those things. But we have to give ourselves a break every now and then. But and the other thing is not to like dwell on numbers. Like from a patient standpoint, like it's easy to look at the numbers and get really kind of depressed. Instead of doing that, like literally go out and go meet people. And referral-based practices is all about building relationships, not about just hitting as many different pockets of people as you can. Like once you find those people that you kind of jive with, then you have to constantly kind of like nourish that relationship and kind of become friends with them and revisit those kinds of things.
Sure.
That's how you build practices, and instead of dwelling on the numbers and looking at like what your stats are for this week, like just don't even look at it. Go out and do something that's going to make your next week's stats look better, and just forget about what the practice stats say. You can revisit those in a month or something. But if you're sitting there dwelling on them, like it just creates a negative environment.
For sure.
It just leads to a stagnant practice. And so, not dwelling on those things and scheduling things into your open spots, so that you're out either becoming a better businessman, a better doctor, or a better marketer, or whatever. Build that into your day instead of beating your head on why there's no patients there. And then the other thing I would say is to develop systems. Like everything should have a system except for patient care.
Yeah.
And kind of stay to that system and hone it and change it, obviously. But that's one of the things I learned from Mark is to, even if you're not busy, like practice like you're busy. Cluster work, book early so that you can practice your systems so that when you do get busy, like everything's kind of in place and you're ready to go. Or if you're a busy doc now, like maybe you need to change your systems. But everything should have a system from the time the patient walks in the door to the time they leave, except for their care. Those are the three things I would say.
It's like Tim Ferriss, he says, being effective as well as being efficient, doing both. I think that ties into the systems thing.
For sure.
For the amount we reference him, we really got to try and figure out how to talk.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll send him a shirt.
There you
go. There you go.
And a bumper sticker.
Yeah. The last one I have is, what information would you go back to tell yourself, either in training or education, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it may be? And kind of, if you could, like, place where you were at when you would give yourself that.
Right, yeah.
No
So,
kidding.
my career history is pretty interesting. It's about as ADD as you can get. So, 10 years ago, I would have just been starting, I started a partner practice in Lincoln initially.
Okay.
And then I transitioned to this multidisciplinary facility.
Yeah.
So I was the only chiropractor in the state, or even maybe a two-state region that was in a large facility like this.
Okay.
So I was just starting, that practice within the spine center, which was at the time 7 orthopedic spine surgeons, 3 PTs, 2 physiatrists, and a staff of about 70. So I was the lone chiropractor. There was a brace guy there that did bracing and those kinds of things. So we were kind of the 2 oddball guys. But I guess if I were to go back and if anything would be what I just talked about would be to learn how to, even though I wasn't horribly busy at the beginning, like I felt like I was starting over, like I would tell myself that I need to be more disciplined in my approach to building a practice.
Gotcha.
And not just rely on 7 guys to feed you, because that wasn't necessarily like their whole idea of, they just wanted to have somebody there that they could, I was the token chiropractor to say, oh yeah, we have everything, in one
I
building,
gotcha.
versus, kind of feed my practice. And then the other thing is, 10 years ago, I was still kind of in that, I can get everybody better in 6 visits, and I was in that mode still kind of coming out of it, but I would go back and kind of tell myself to go back and really study and learn function, because it's, there's no fixing people. People are more like a garden, is what Faye always used to say. Like, you have to kind of plant the seed, you have to nourish the soil, like you have to create this environment that's going to allow them to adapt to the things that you're doing.
For sure.
You're not going to fix them like a car. And so I would go back and I would tell myself that this is really what you should be doing, and forget about the negative stigmas and negative kind of press that the chiropractic profession has. You're not doing anything wrong by seeing somebody 12 to 15 times.
Right.
So I would go back and I'd sit myself down and have a little talk about it.
There you go. There you go.
It's a good analogy with the garden. I think
That's what I was trying to tell our athletes. Like, we're not healing you. We're just trying to make the best environment for your body to end up taking care of itself.
Perfect.
Through one way or the other. Like, that's all we're trying to figure out.
Right.
I can see how that would put more of an emphasis on what they do too.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of take some self-responsibility for, home care or stretches or whatever they're doing.
And it kind of takes the stress off of you. This approach to, holistic approach to functional care, this holistic approach to patient care, to patient performance. Like, once you know what their deficits are, and you know how to implement like the corrective measures, like the stress is off you. Then it's just time and adaptation. Like, it's not a stressful environment for you to like hurry and get this person back on the field. Like, you know what's going to take. You have a rough idea how long it may take, but the stress is off both of you, and you can just kind of make the changes that you need to make for the patients or for the athletes or whatever it is that you're doing.
Sweet.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
So, in closing, where can people find you? Check everything out, and then anything else that you want them to check out or plug, or any websites?
Right.
Go.
So people can find us at Omaha Spine Sport. We're here in Omaha, Nebraska. We're in the western part of Omaha, not too far from Elkhorn. We're on Facebook, and I believe Dr. Peters has even got us on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter.
We'll link them all up.
We're kind of out there on the World Wide Web, and you can find us there, and you can Google us. You should be able to find us. I guess the only thing I would tell people is that if you haven't ever been to a chiropractor, we're more than backs and necks. We basically treat everything from TMJ to the first metatarsal phalangeal joint. So from toes to nose, like we kind of pride ourselves in tackling the stuff that nobody else wants to tackle. That's what really excites us, is to see shoulder problems, hip problems, foot and ankle problems, plantar fasciitis. Like we want to see it all.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank
letting
you.
us come on in here.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. No, thank you.
Nice chatting with you.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Clinically Pressed. You can always check out our full website at clinicallypressed.com for all videos of each episode, as well as all of our insights. We are on every podcast outlet out there, so please check us out wherever you'd like to. While you're there, if you could, please rate us. We'd appreciate it, and apparently it helps out tremendously. Also, check out our daily blog at totalathletictherapy.com and sign up for our free weekly newsletter, where you'll get all those entries right to your inbox, along with plenty of extras. Thank you again for checking out this episode, and we hope to see you for the next one.